Hi there. Thank you for downloading and listening to the Lean Into Artcast, the show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, take on various topics that tend to cross one's path when you go on this endeavor of communicating with images. We think hard about this stuff so that you might as well. My name is Jerzy Drozd. I am a cartoonist and teaching artist, and the other host is...
Hey, Jerzy, I am Rob Stenzinger. I am a user experience designer, and I also make interactive things, and I teach and coach about that stuff too.
Which is at robcoach.me, which we'll talk about more in the second half of the show. 305? Is that really where we're at now?
Every number is surprising after 300. That's why it works that way.
The top of every episode from now is just going to be us going, wow! But, I don't know if I've done 300 of anything. Well, I've drawn like over 300 comics pages, I'm sure, but I haven't actually sat down and counted. But,
oh, you haven't? It's that's a fun exercise. Like that's a journal exercise worth, because even if you're estimating, it's an interesting thing to just look back and face the trail you left behind of all the stuff you made. And that's where I think at some point in our conversations, I would bring up like, oh, I'm closing in on 700 podcasts or whatever, because adding up across the different the different shows, I mean, it adds up. I can't even imagine you have to be at way over 1,000, close to 2,000 at this point.
That's a decent question. I have no idea.
Which wow. Just looking at those numbers, it's like, oh, how do I feel about that? And where I don't know, how did that investment go and where might it go next and all that stuff. And it's also just interesting that the stuff adds up, right? I mean, yeah, you have probably just thousands of comic pages you've done too. So
it's funny you bring this up. This actually leads me to a little bit of a newsy thing that I wanted to do at the top of the show that I completely forgot about until you brought this up, because I just did a talk last week for the Ohio Arts Council. Was that not going to work? Oh, I had a whole bunch of pages pulled up in Chrome, and Chrome's not working when I pull up the demo. Let me put this into Chrome instead of into Chromium Edge. So yeah, I mentioned this in episode 304, that I was doing a presentation, a webinar on creating classroom documentation, which is just a fancy way of saying, how do you collect the evidence and the trail of competence you left behind and formalize that information so that when you go to reach out to a partner organization or hosting institution, you can build trust more quickly. In other words, wow. Oh, I'm in the wrong app here. Okay. Well, Chrome is not working for me today. That's going to be interesting. I'm not going to be able to pull up our visual examples as easily. I don't know. I should have tested that before we started. Anyway, I will link to it in the show notes, but the Ohio Arts Council posted the video on their YouTube channel. So documenting your classroom experience is up there. It's an hour webinar, and I walk through, I go through the anatomy of what a lesson plan looks like, something that you would present to, like a lesson plan or a artist vision statement or some kind of if you're going to do a presentation or a workshop for an institution, like just defining what's going to happen there. And then the middle part of the webinar is going through a thinking exercise where I give prompts to say okay, you've probably either created something or taught something. What happened in those? Let's unpack those experiences, and then we could take those experiences and map them onto the anatomy of a lesson plan or workshop presentation form. So the goal of it was to get somebody started to be able to start writing their own documentation to, be able to make proposals to conventions, art centers, learning institutions, university schools, libraries, etc. So,
yeah, that's very timely. I mean, and this is, our episode 304. We went through this sort of a version of that, or some of the thoughts that you were bringing into the workshop. Yeah, this is that's great. It's out there and live. I was able to find it on YouTube, but then I was thinking, am I set up to do the sharing okay? And I'm not sure as I look into this, I don't even wander off into
a
lot of places in YouTube, right? But my right column is banana pants, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. I've got it pulled up on screen right now. So I got Chrome working again. So you could see it at the bottom of the screen under uploads, documenting your classroom experience. Again, I'll link to it in the show notes. But anyway, but what are we doing this week? Every week we show up and pick a single topic and try to drill down on it as far as we can, as thoughtfully as we can, and as non-prescriptively as we can, right? What do we got?
It's a funny gig we have, isn't it? It's like we're trying to sort of share our experience in a way that others could reconstruct their own experience. It's a kind of teaching, but it's not guruism. And but we believe in what we do, and we want people to figure it out for themselves, and etc. It's so funny, but we're quirky like that. And so here we are. We had a meeting last week. We did a rebroadcast, I believe, and but we still did some planning and work. And thinking about the topic, something came up about chunking workflow and how this has been a thing on my mind again as I've been like sort of working through this combination of well, I'm coding on a game project and wearing a variety of hats for that, but I'm doing a lot of writing and some illustration too of articles that are also related to some talks I have coming up and also workshops. So there's a lot of development, especially in the area of writing that I've been doing. And I think about just sort of dividing the work up in useful ways and chunking the process to make sure I don't get lost and all that stuff. And somehow in that conversation, it was like you see Jersey, you were like, yeah, okay, like that sounds like a good topic. And I was like, that's great. And then we hung up and I went away. I'm like, wait, what's the topic? And so I did this a little bit of journaling, and I think it is a lot related to chunking workflow, and also even the like how we look at our work, like the mental model specifically. Um, w- what do you think before we jump in?
That sounds great to me. Yeah, like so. Sort of returning to this idea of chunking your workflow, which we covered in like episode 140 something or other, like ages ago. But that was really using comics as a case in point. I like this idea of backing up, looking at some other examples of like this kind of chunking and how the mental model that we use to make sense of what's the other word for this?
You can call it your metaphor.
Well, yeah, and well, also like I guess it like relates a little bit to epistemology, like the science of how we know what we know. If you want to back up another step back, right?
Oh, sure,
But
metacognition and all that.
yeah, but like a little stepping back a little bit, like to like evaluate, like, well, how are we? What is our mental model of how we understand things, and how does that inform how we chunk, right? So I think it's going to be a more subtle and nuanced sort of look at this idea of like chunking your workflow. Rather, it will definitely not be prescriptive. So with that, how about I just go ahead and hit some? Whoa! I hit a button. I didn't mean to hit this one. That's from way back when Zach was on the show. So the music indicates we are now in the first part of the show. So, Rob, I am super interested in looking at your what you've been thinking about with all the writing you've been doing lately. And I will say, I have a selfish stake in this, in that I'm doing a lot of writing right now to develop another pitch. A lot of writing. It's like an hour a day. That's all I'm giving myself to do it. But it's like a very focused and intentional. Like, okay, an hour. Let's type. And I'm hitting some highs and lows with it. And so I'm very curious about to hear your experience with this and how you think about this to help me come back to it with a little bit of a fresher start. So,
Well, yeah, there's something about that progression, and it's like I think in the second half we'll talk about like ways where we can label the progression and sort of map ourselves out of this when we're getting stuck. But like I was feeling the stuckness right recently, and off and on, and actually with each of these. So I've got this overall strategy that if I work on articles that are feeding and nourishing a series of thoughts unpacking experiences and getting useful chunks of that for workshops and talks and stuff coming up, right? It seems easy peasy, right? And I feel a version of this challenge when it comes to a workshop. But what's funny is, like, if you work on a section of a workshop, you're not publishing it, right? Anytime I'm dealing with publishing, there's a certain extra pressure or whatever that now this is the share. This is a product. It's going to feed into other products, but it's also a product. And all of a sudden, I'm hitting these. I don't know, the the hills and valleys of the experience.
Mhm.
And so right when I was about to, I was at the later phase of my of a recent article I'm working on, and it's an article about connecting how when I look back, I promise it's more useful than this long-winded expression, but the idea, like, it's connecting 7 habits of highly effective people and user experience design, and how both have this human-centeredness, both are systemic in thinking, and there's a lot of interesting connections. And I happen to have uh, had a lot of experience with that book in sort of my early 20s, uh, and it was really formative for me. And I just thought about it again recently, and all of a sudden, all right, here I am writing about it. I'm like, yep, this is my next article. And I get toward that later stage, and it's tough. And so what do you think about this? The where as a so sometimes I write to get unstuck from writing, right?
Mhm.
And I will try to watch myself, because I could go off and I can play in the land of generating ideas near infinitely. It's just the quirk I have. I love that space. And I'm like, which is related to this, where I'm like, what's my deal? I can get unstuck, or I could use that to stay stuck. So here I am. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to turn this into something constructive. So I made a tweet thread out of it, and I shared that. And
I was going to pull up that tweet thread. So do you want to go through it line by line while I pull it up on screen?
sure, do you want, and feel free to react along the way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I constructed this and I shared it as a thread. And I said, making things is easy and making things is tough. So here I am trying to turn this into a pattern of a little bit of poetic, whatever, recurring themes. And that's the start of it, that pattern. In the progression from idea to finished enough thing, every stage seems to contain an essential challenge. Related to that, I should be writing an article, and my brain gave me this thread instead. So this is related to the topic of mental models. Like, somehow there's this story of, like, a thing that we're making doesn't exist, and we go through some experience and we bring it into existence. And so you go through from at least some kind of starting, some kind of middle, some kind of end, right? And so that's
Mm-hmm.
what I'm trying to get at with each of these thoughts. So first, starting is easy. Starting well is tough.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of these you can pick it and explore and dig into. And they're purposefully trying to be, flavorfully poetic or whatever, but who knows? Continuing for a while is easy. Continuing with focus and credibility is tough.
Mm.
Walking away. Yeah, go ahead.
With the focus, yes, get that. Wonder if you could elaborate on credibility. Credibility to whom?
For yourself and your audience. It's so, like, imbuing your work with that extra thinking, where you're not just throwing suppositions into the world. And I get, there are some books that I like, but I don't feel as enthusiastic about, where I feel like I'm doing the work of filtering and trying to find the more reliable information within the craft of authors just saying stuff. And I get that. The creative process, there's a lot of people who say stuff, but then you can say stuff that has connections to other tested ideas, right? And so I think, like, that's when you can bring a signal of credibility, not just rationalizing your thought with evidence that you went and backtracked and found, but maybe sometimes where you went and questioned your own thought enough to think about, well, here I expressed it clearly, so you can verify it yourself. You can verify the credibility in my work by just go ahead and analyze it, pick it apart. And also consider these other sources. Here's my attempt at triangulating my own work and
Got it.
providing a
Yeah.
foothold for you to do that kind of, if you care to, consuming it with that kind of investigative lens.
Right. Got it. So credibility stands for carefully thought through ideas that have been tested through additional thinking and or research and testing by, employing it in a variety of settings with other people to get some feedback on it. So it's a tested idea.
Yep. Go ahead. Yes.
Sorry. Oh
no. Tested. And I'm jumping on your words because I'm realizing the other thing I left out is transparent, right? So if I have a supposition and I'm just throwing this in the world, let that be clear.
Got it. Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, that clarifies it for me. Thank you. So then the next one is,
wow, spam calls, and unstoppable spam calls.
we're going to be in a period this year where I think that's going to be happening to a lot of us a lot.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's my Google Hangouts number, which is the more easily found number I use, and harder to mute, evidently. So anyway, sorry about that. Walking away when it all makes sense is easy. Walking further to make it better is tough.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of my key weaknesses. So walking away when it all makes sense to me is having thought through the problem enough to really have a good idea of a way of solving it. And once that's conceived enough and makes sense, phew, that feels good. And then, but making that into something useful for others is hard. And are more difficult. Calling it done is easy, and knowing when to call it done is tough.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this easy tough pattern in this whole little mini prose exercise. Putting a project into the world is easy. Representing it while being present to connect with others is tough.
Yeah, that's true. I made a thing. Look at my thing. And that part is relatively easy, but then yes, being able to advocate for it in a way that is compassionate, thoughtful, and attentive to the people who are connecting with it. That's the part that makes you sweat. Yeah,
and it's crucial, and it's the hard work after the hard work, right? It's like if you did the work to get the thing done to be a work that you believe in sharing with the world, just throwing it on the pile doesn't help anybody. You have to actually be there and do stuff with the work to help people connect with the work. And I really appreciate and understand that now. And I'm basically reminding myself, and this is all reflecting my own creative weaknesses and quirks for the most part. I did not do research to create this list other than just try a lot of stuff for a few decades. So let's see, putting project, getting distracted with other things is easy. Walking away when you have learned enough is tough. So yeah, I mean, I have an attractive nuisance list of projects where I can just wander into it and be like, hey, let's get into that. You know what's really fun? Early stage creative work. Play. Let's play all day in this conceptual land, unfinished things.
Yeah.
And I get stuck there. So, and yeah, walking away. And so some projects, it's kind of like, well, even like, I can think of my webcomic. I can think of certain game projects and whatnot. It's like, when do you stop?
Yeah, and I would amend this if I were your editor. I would say walking away when you have learned enough to start is tough, or learned enough to move on is tough, because that there's a circuitous nature to that, right? It's like at least I'll talk about my personal quirks. Is that I find the only way I can get started is if I go, okay, I've got enough built here to get going. Like I got a concept, I've got a direction, I got an approach. And maybe it even feels like I've learned enough. Maybe it feels like I've got everything I need. And then I get about a third of the way through. I'm like, oh, I haven't thought this through as clearly as I have. But I can stop. I can step back, go back to like doing more conceptual exploration or research, and then come right back where I left off and, either knit together or improve upon or build upon what I've already had. Case in point, the Baron von Bear pitch I did last year, where we had that coaching session on the show, and you led me to realize, oh, I'm at a point. The reason this is feeling frustrating right now is because I am at a point where I have to go back and learn a little bit more before I can progress on. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Yeah, there could be other reasons why you're feeling stuck.
Yeah.
And it's not just that this certain stage is inherently, it's like there's a missing piece, and going and doing the work, bring that into, that's it's like trying to make a decision without enough research.
Yeah.
You can easily end up in that situation where all of a sudden you have designers or engineers, product managers, or whoever is on your team, or even yourself, just spinning your wheels trying to make a decision without the criteria that would actually make it far easier to clarify what is a good decision here.
I really love that word enough, though, because like I feel like when we get into the second half and start talking about some like actual chunking, that's what it's all about, is like doing just enough to keep the momentum going and not waiting until it's all fully formed, right? Like, anyway.
Well, and I love your example of in a way, so that somehow the I'm glad that coaching session helped, but it's I think it's an example of how you can, um trusting that, finding that, finding a way forward through the creative work, even when you're stuck. It's there's a way. There's a way, and there's a tool, and like that's where the mental models, I think, help, right? Where, making sense of it, where you can feel like this what the project has become. It's just this now, where I know it's not what it needs to be, but what do I do here? And if you have a way to, even proceed when it doesn't feel great, feeling that eventually it will feel great because of the process has your back. Um, your tools and approach will help get you through. Which is interesting. Overdoing and struggling is easy, even though it feels. Finding just enough confidence, insight, action, resources, creative results is tough, even though when it does happen, it feels easy.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was me playing with the formula there, and just, yeah, and I don't know, maybe delaying on getting the work. And I had this wrap up thought, looking at this list of easy, tough things. I admire the qualities of the tough list, yet the easy list is giving me ideas. And here's where I realized that the easy is also useful. That you can, get traction through. It's not like I just listed out like good and bad. Like this is, it's not so simple. So because the creative process, if you're, um, getting something down, filling a blank page, doing something that's easy is good. It's great, and using the easy to get tough it's a they're all tools to just get you through making the thing. So yeah, and I think I needed that to help remind me, and that it's okay that because I was near the final draft stage of my recent article, right? And this didn't have as hard of a creative cycle as last month's the one, about assumptions. I might even had a couple of side comments because I had so much built up energy about it. But the assumptions article, I wrote like at least 4,000 to 5,000 words before I found even the beginning of the right, like, next 1,500 words that it needed to be.
Wow.
And that was just where I was like, am I I'm just feel like I'm just making weird fart noises in the corner or something. Like I started out because I ran this, like, both articles went through a similar process. My kind of article writing process. That's I decided, like, of all my ideas and everything, they've like, the ones that float to the top have to have certain criteria to stand
Mhm.
out and be at the top of the list. And I play with the ones at the top of the list, and one of them takes off, right? And I thought, and as I'm again, I'm very happy and content in those early phases, and I feel almost like invincible, honestly. Creatively invincible. I can conceptualize whatever. And I know that's not true. I have plenty of flaws and mistakes I make and all that stuff, but I feel that way
Mm-hmm.
in those
Mm-hmm.
early phases. And I feel super not, I feel highly uh, extinguishable later on.
So
And
I'm reminded a little bit, and maybe just because I've been listening to this audiobook, I just started listening to, after all these years of you recommending this book to me, Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. And the audiobook is, I texted you, I'm like, I'm only an hour and a half in, and it's amazing. And one of the things that she did that hit me just in the right spot that I think speaks to a little bit of what you're talking about is she describes this thing called first thoughts. Do you remember this? And first thoughts are, by her description, are things that are unencumbered by all of the additional context and categorizations that we put on through our life experience, right? And first thoughts are things that happen when you meditate. So she compares writing to meditation a lot. And in meditation, as you and I both know, and anybody who's done it a lot, is that the idea isn't to quiet the mind so that there's no thought. It's so that you still the mind so that when thoughts happen, they just fly by and you don't hang on to them too much, or hopefully at all, right? Like, just let them happen. Oh, I feel angry. I feel uncomfortable. I've got an itch. What am I going to do about my taxes? What, is my mother mad at me? All these things happen in your head all the time, but like, you're stilling yourself so that it just flows over you. And she's like, well, when you're writing from first thoughts, you're just letting the writing flow out of you, and you're just capturing it all, and you're not trying to create context and in importance until way later, right? And like, that stage of like just generating can feel really, really good until it comes time to, like, okay, well, what do I have in front of me? Like, what meaning did I hopefully create on the page, right? So yeah, that's tough.
well, so I think, well, hey, guess what? I've got some criteria to filter this out. So
Okay.
theoretically, I'm dealing with some really um uh the stronger ideas of all that, like letting the ideas flow out and whatnot. I forgot about that phrase, first thoughts, but
And
I need to go
she's
back.
very careful to point out that first thoughts don't come easy, right? Because like, when you're first sort of doing like just what would I call it? Purposeless writing, or writing exercises just to get thoughts, just to put thoughts on paper without any agenda. Just like when you first meditate, you keep getting caught on all these thoughts, right? Like, they catch you, and you find yourself like just chewing on them for a long time. They're like, wait, let it go, right? And until you're really, really practiced, can you just let them flow by? So it's the same thing she says with writing, where it's like, you gotta just to generate a lot of stuff, and yeah, you're gonna get hooked on these things, and it's gonna feel like you're just generating ideas, but you're still like sort of like winding yourself around certain concepts over and over again. And so you do these writing exercises to unwind yourself so that the first thoughts can come through, as she describes it. It's I'm about halfway through, and I'm loving this book. So anyway,
Yeah, I'm excited to reread it now that you mention it. It's yes. Are you? I was curious or hoping to share this criteria quick.
Yes,
And
please.
yeah, just as, because feeling. I do feel that this is useful. I'm not just saying this to like sort of wallow and grump about the challenging. I think finding your own criteria is important, right? But for me, when things are sort of are getting caught in my list and my net that of the things I want to work on, the ones that float to the top have these qualities. Um, this is a funny one. It's a troublemaking one. It's one of my. It's the first one. It's, am I feeling it? Do I, is it in my voice? Do I have something to say about this? Because I could easily essentially be trying to do a cover band version of someone else that inspired me or whatever. It's like, do I really have the thing to say about this? And that's a filter.
Mhm.
And I, yes.
I just think of an example of like when the difference between when I worked a day job and when I became a advocate and started working with nonprofit organizations. And when I was working a day job, if a customer would ask me a question and like, is the mayonnaise over there or over there? I'd be like, sure, why not? Like it was like I was so disengaged from what was being asked of me in the moment. Whereas like now, like when working with like Kids Read Comics or CXC, it's like this matters, and I'm going to be extremely careful all the time in how I engage with it, right? Because there's this is speaking to me. This is something in my voice. This is something that has resonance and meaning and purpose to me. That's so I'm just using that as like a concrete example to reinforce what you're saying there. So.
No, that's, yeah, I like that example. It's the yeah, and so that you're reminding me too is like this is criteria for sort of the most professional writing, not just the general practice stuff. I'm also, working on just getting unstuck with blogging, just general whatever are things that can come out, and I'll share more frequently and whatnot. I'm working on that. Might make that a goal for March. We'll see. But but yeah, so like does this really serve something that I care about? That's awesome. And then it's like, well, do I have an explanation why I think it's useful? Just because I have feelings on this and I want to say something, if I get out of my own head,
Yeah.
what do I, can I describe why this is useful?
Yeah.
Um, have I talked about this already? Do I have some draft thoughts?
I
Chances are I
love
might have
this.
podcasted about this.
Yeah. This is great. Yeah, to go through your trail of competence and see if there's any like beginnings or other interpretations on this thought that you can mine from your own history. That's great.
And it's just it's a dialogue, right? So like I can
Mm.
look at something I did, and I don't just have to like just copy and paste. I can just react to it and
Yeah.
hopefully be more ready because I can build off of something and have a dialogue with, even if it's with myself,
Yeah.
past self. So okay, what other signals am I getting? Real signals from the audience. It's not just hypothetical. Has someone asked me about this at some point? There are things like, so if like working with folks in doing design workshops, and when someone comes to me specifically about hey, how do you approach the like framing the space visually to get through so many different topics when you do a user journey map or something like that, and I'm like, examples of stuff people have asked me. It's almost like, what is the world asking of me?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then of course, do I have sources and evidence and experience for this? Some of these are a little maybe redundant feeling, but I could have I could, who knows? This criteria is living. So, but this means that, you know, uh, this helps that credibility signal quite a bit of, like, oh yeah, I know about 3 different books I read and this blog article, and I tried this one time, whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and also, does producing this work feed into other work? Obviously, right? Or
Right.
am I starting yet another, thread of thought?
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. Not everything has to be met here, but it's worth thinking about. It's
Mm-hmm.
just it's good for this article if I can use it somewhere and build off of it. How, and then here's just a rough estimate about the effort I think it will take for this, if for me to do this well.
Mm.
Because yeah, I can early creative phase it probably in an hour. Doesn't mean it'll be good, right?
Right.
Um, to do it well, is this going to be easy, medium, or difficult? Why?
Mm-hmm.
It might be like, oh, this is going to require a bunch of illustration, or just things that I'm going to have to do a lot of journaling to find the narrative here or whatever, right? This is going to be a tough one. There you go. That's the criteria.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So, like, yeah, I wouldn't call this chunking in terms of a laundry list to meet. This is more like a rubric. A rubric is a sort of like a matrix of thought of like, okay, let's just see if we get hot signals in three or four quadrants on this, then it's probably something worth pursuing.
It's a gateway. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. I mean, it's like to get to the next stage or the chunk of work, you shall not pass unless you get through some of this here at least.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's my creative process, Gandalf.
And it's not as simple as speak friend and enter.
No. Nope. Okay. So, yeah. So I don't know. What are your thoughts here on this?
Well, so I'm just curious what happens next after you've like done this like preliminary sort of concept development phase, and then you've gone through your rubric, and it's like, okay, it's ticking a lot of switches or a lot of lights are going off. What's next?
So then the next chunk is to
and we're talking about writing an article specifically.
Yeah, do the writing. So it's rough draft, let words come out. This is the topic, and then I start with details that answer the filter questions, right? And then explore from there. I'll start to describe a time that when I encountered this topic, I will, like, for instance, let's see, the article about assumptions. I wrote so many times, and it's because I was doing that hunting of like, where is this? I don't know how it passed the gauntlet because I still didn't have enough clarity, but like I really believed in the idea, and I'm proud of the article that I made from it. But like that exploration of, okay, how have what I encounter some assumptions in meetings. I've encountered assumptions in the collaborative process to design products. I encountered assumption, like, so where has this come up, and start to describe those things and whatnot. And then eventually I realized that the like getting a more exposure to my own thinking of assumptions, I was like, oh, that's one of my favorite things about assumptions is humor. And just sort of the surprise and juxtaposition of one idea and something hidden about it that is actually the real thing, and you reveal that, and it's joyful and fun if you're doing this in a joke context.
Right. Well, you have like a one panel gag cartoon at the top of the article too, which I have on screen.
And the other thing is about assumptions is, like, I really like the idea of how it's like there's the freedom that can come from, like, don't repress it. We're all doing it anyway. Use that to propel the creative effort. Use that to get through the conceptual space and dig deeper, right? This is fantastic because you don't have to be stuck anywhere because you're already doing this work. That it just, a lot of times we acknowledge it and hide it and maybe feel bad about it, right? But so anyway, then I'm like, wow, there's some. So I found the utility, and then I kept writing, but for that one, it took a lot of words. And for the 7 habits of highly effective people and how it influenced me for um, uh, my early, like, my formative user experience mindset, it was it was just like remembering this other piece of the story. So I was doing the writing where and just brainstorming the topics, and somehow that one came out and stuck with me. I'm like, wait a minute, this is interesting. 7 habits in UX. And I thought, I think this is because I think my early human-centered, systemic minded exposure. And I never, like, in when I describe my career or whatever, I'm like, this is surprising. There's because I always start the story of I started a game development company and whatever, got led to web development, which led to just doing this stuff because there was so much demand in the world. So I got a job in the whatever. I'm fast forwarding the story, but like I ended up, working in the financial industry, being a web architect, and I went to this amazing seminar on human factors, and it blew my mind. And I was super excited that I had such great criteria and whatever. And that was like, oh, that's my metaphorical spider bite, and where I became, like started that UX path in
Mm.
it with clarity, right? Where it's like I was already working toward it
Mm-hmm.
and learning from a variety of sources, but like a little more hodgepodge, less focused. And the this so there was this aha of like, wait a minute, 7 habits, doing things like so the 7 habits of highly effective people, if you've not encountered it, this is a book written in 1989 by Stephen R. Covey, and it was a very influential management philosophy thing that especially through the 90s. And I I encountered it when I was right when I was working on that startup, and also being a manager at it's my main job. Paying the rent was I was a manager for a janitorial company, and the so this book was exposing me to humans, like really pragmatic, useful humans, like problem solving things for being human centered and thinking of a bigger picture and being systemic minded and whatnot. And I had no idea like how influential it was till I was doing this reflection. So doing the writing, all this stuff is coming out, and then it comes out in the rough form, and it exists, and it wasn't as lost as the assumptions article. It's like the essence was more there, especially when I start doing, well, here's a little version of the story I just shared, and that's some context for further exploration. And I haven't published that article yet. I'm like about to publish it today, probably.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Breaking news.
yeah, and then it goes into like, well, here's the let's see. I don't know if I could. It's a little bit of a pain as far as sharing my screen, but the gist of the 7 habits being there's individual habits, and then there's collective habits, and then there's
I've got the
the
7 habits actually on screen right now. If you want
continuous
to.
improvement final habit.
Okay.
All right,
I've got went to their website and I've got it up on screen. The 7 habits of highly effective people, and it's got the 7 habits listed right here. Be proactive. Begin with the end in mind. Put first things first. Think win-win. So not scarcity mindset.
Exactly.
Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And habit 6, synergize. And habit 7, sharpen the saw.
Yeah. So you got some jargon in there, but like overall, in the core ideas, really useful stuff. And it was, I think it was very, very useful for me at the time, and was like a positive influence for a certain way of looking at problems, a certain way of engaging with, having a curiosity for understanding a bigger picture before, recommending a solution to anything and whatnot. Right. It was so to me, it's, and then I found the other thread of this, where it's like, this is from, not even from like the design community, has like, you wouldn't see this book in the sections or in your searches related to UX. But what's interesting, I think it's highly related, highly relevant. So why not point out this idea also that like there's a lot of nourishment to be found for your design practice in other domains.
That's great. So you're talking about patterns of thinking and patterns of activity that lead to like signals to how to develop further. But I'm wondering if this is a good opportunity to take a break, to start to step back and talk about mental models now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's I think the basic survival mode of like getting through the process. This, we've covered it. I wanted to share enough context to be, like this is the content that was explored and then refined through the process.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, that definitely there's
And if I were to
metaphors and other stuff to look at for sure.
If I were to summarize what I'm also hearing is that you are not only digging into idea generation in terms of like what am I interested in, what is like getting me emotionally motivated, but then you're digging back into your own past to say like what kind of connections can I make with my own life experience to moments that resonated, that stood out, spider bite moments where like something had additional clarity. What I wrote down was like it was things coming into focus. That was some language that you used, like things come into focus. Looking back in your life, what does this topic connect in any way with points in my life where things came into focus? Okay, well that's worth mining too. But let's step back even further and talk about like how does our mental model that we engage with the work and the world with inform this too? Does that sound like I'm teeing it up correctly?
Absolutely. I mean, there are ways that we can hold metaphors and maps that get us I think can get us through the process, honestly.
That's great. Okay, and that sounds very appealing to me. Okay, so we'll come back in about a minute and 30 seconds to talk about that. But before we do that, we got to thank some people who make this show possible. Those people are the folks who support us on Patreon. Patreon. Hit the button, Jerzy. There we go. Patreon.com/leadintoart is the website. What is it? It's a way for you to give us a monthly upvote. If you think that what we do is meaningful, if you believe in Rob and Jerzy, want to help support what we do, make it more sustainable, you can contribute as little as $1 a month. And that helps, the more people to do that, the more the show becomes a sustainable project where Rob and I are compensated for our time that it takes to make this thing. And you can also cancel at any time. You can just like sign up for a month and avail yourself of all the stuff behind the scenes and then, check out at the end of the month. But I want to thank 5 people who have been showing up on a regular basis to support us. First up, JS Taskus. Thank you, JS, for believing in us and what we do. You can find JS on Twitter at JS Taskus. And Brandon Dayton, longtime friend of the show, been on the show a couple times. You can find Brandon on Twitter at Brandon Dayton. He's been doing some really interesting blogging lately, people. You should check it out. Stephen Black. You can find Stephen Black on Twitter at Black's Sideshow. 2 S's in the middle. Thank you, Stephen. It means a lot to us. And Becca Hilburn shows up time and time again. Thank you so much, Becca. We really appreciate the support. You can find Becca on all social media at Natto Soup and Jodels Pox. Thank you, Jodels. It means a lot to us. It's JBobArtist on Twitter. You can join them all at patreon.com/leanitoart, where you'll find all the shows we make, as well as the extra leans, the shows we record only for people who support us on Patreon. And those posts become an open mic thread where you can talk about whatever you want in a safe place with fellow leaners. Patreon.com/leanitoart. Thank you. It means a lot to us.
I should probably add that URL too. So if someone links to leanintoart.com/Patreon, why not just redirect them?
Redirect it. Yes, that's a reasonable thing to do. Okay, so let's get motivated for the second half of the show.
Mental model. So in this case,
mental models.
Punching castles.
With your mental models.
That's right.
So
giant ape punching castles. All right.
So what do you mean by mental models, Rob?
Okay. So little Wikipedia quote. So a mental model is an explanation of someone's thought process about how something works in the real world. So it's your metaphor. It's our language is just imbued and infused all over the place with tons of metaphors we use subtly and whatnot. Assuming that change and challenge is painful, and we'd say like no pain, no gain when we're working out or whatever. The all sorts of brutal metaphors related to success of business, right? When you're killing it,
you're crushing it today. Yeah.
So we're funny like that. But you can actually, I don't know if hopefully this helps others. I feel a little more sane when I'm noticing that I can use this plausible way to describe what is happening with a project that when it began and when somewhere in the middle, and now I'm getting closer to the end, or I'm, like how it happened. And it's not always just linear, and it's, perfectly clean of this stage, that stage, that stage, but like overall, that in general, it has um a utility to say like this progression. And one that I've referred to a pile of times in our show is the from the oddly named book, A Whack on the Side of the Head. Because I mean, come on, do I need this violence to get creative? I don't know, but it's useful. Thank you, Roger Van Oak. The explorer, artist, judge, and warrior, and that's his mental model for creative process.
So what are those four different?
Being fed by the world. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, please read it. So what are the explorer, artist, judge, and warrior do?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was let's see. We have an article in the show notes, but
yes, I'll pull it up on screen while we talk about it. Here we go. The four roles you need to be fully creative.
Yeah, it's right. That's a different way of relating information. Otherwise known as prescriptive, but
that's very accepting of a prescription, Rob. Yes. Okay. So, so the explorer.
Yeah. So the explorer is you're putting yourself in situations to be fed and connecting and learning from whatever in the world to feed to get you ready for this project. So there, you can go into a lot of details as far as all these, but just broad brush, that's what the explorer is doing. The artist is clarifying and making some ideas out of it all and shaping it, expressing it, right? And then the judge is kind of the project, let's see, the like curator or editor, right? My articles, like honestly, like I perform the editorial role for Kate for when she does writing, and she does for my writing. So collaborative partner and my wife, Kate Shield Stenzinger, and it helps a ton. So having an editor is wonderful. And then the warrior, the warrior is kind of like the project manager, watching the clock, the calendar, making sure if a barrier comes up, you get rid of that barrier, however, right? So, there's a lot of work that the warrior has as far as, moving the project forward and getting it out into the world. So,
and market and sell your idea is one of the ways to develop your warrior, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the skills listed on this article, which we'll link to in the show notes as well. Okay.
So that's been a useful one. I like it. I find it's like, a creative project, it just doesn't poof into the world, right? I mean, there's a lot of effort, whatever you're doing, if it's coding or writing or drawing or, for single illustrations, or of course, putting a lot of drawings together in the context of a comic. So anyway, like it's having some kind of story to that is helpful for me. And that, honestly, that's the one I lean on a lot. That is Roger Van Oak's book. And I like it, but I kind of, I don't just use that model. What kind of mental model do you use, Jerzy? Like, do you have like a story or metaphor for the?
Well, I mean, the thing that I always come back to is, I mean, and this is ever since I was in my early 20s, and it's, I mean, better than most that like I process a lot of my experiences and my creative, even the way I structure my creative work, through metaphors of like that have been given to us through mythology, right? Like there's like things that conjure a mental image. Like, and I go back to an interview I did ages ago with the animator Tom Cito, and he said, when you think of the book Moby Dick, do you think of Call Me Ishmael, one day when I was feeling so-and-so, I went down to the sea? Or do you see Ahab stabbing the heck out of that whale, screaming his head off. Maybe you don't even know the exact words, but you have the image. She's like, what storytellers are always looking for, and I think this is what mythology does really well, is it conjures a mental picture that immediately and effectively and effortlessly delivers a complex idea. And I think one of the reasons that's so appealing to me is because of my lifetime exploration of comics. Comics is really, that's what I'm always trying to do with comics, is can I create a single image in a panel that delivers lots and lots of complexity, but in a way that you don't see the complexity, you just receive it, right? And so like things like, what do I mean? The Arthurian myth of the Grail. The Grail appear like Arthur sits down to have dinner with the knights, and he says, "Well, we don't eat until a miracle has happened, or some kind of like fantastical thing has happened." Right. So it's like we can't progress on with our day-to-day sustaining ourselves until something marvelous, inspiring, or life-changing occurs. Right. We wait for this every day. We look for it every day, and then the Grail appears, and from there, all dazzled. There's this marvelous, miraculous thing that they have to go on quest. And one of the knights, I forget which one, says, "I propose we go off in quest of this thing." And each of us, and they thought it would be shameful to go forth in a group. Each knight went into the forest adventurous at a point of their choosing where it was darkest and there was no way or path, because where there's a path, it's someone else's path. In other words, the treasure you seek has to be absolutely idiosyncratic to you. And if you go on somebody else's path, well, that treasure's already been got. There's no treasure there. It looks like it's easier because there's a path there. So like, you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's a simple story, but so my mental map is always based on this kind of idea of like, I have 1,000 examples that I can, sort of lean toward that help me engage with creative processes, right? And creative projects. So when I'm hitting those parts where I'm stuck, I try to remind myself, it's like I try to remind myself that the real growth of the creative project and myself depends on a moment that they call in storytelling the dark night of the soul. And it sucks. Dark night of the soul is like the worst thing in the world to experience emotionally. You feel alone, you feel worthless, you have like this wonderful, eloquent narrator in your head who has every reason why you are a failure and you should give up. And then whether or not you have that warrior instinct and push through determines on whether or not the project is completed and you get to grow a little bit more as an artist. So yeah, my mental model is much more based on that kind of like poetic and very visual kind of imagery, for better or worse. I mean, this has definitely had an effect on how my friendships play out. Is whether or not you can sit with that, whether or not you're okay with sitting with that and hearing about that again and again determines whether or not we're going to have a long and enduring friendship.
That is, I didn't expect that angle, but I gotta say it's fresh every time, Jerzy. So this is fun. Where there's a path. Holy crap! Do you really do that?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Like, so I just posted a Fabulous Secrets episode to my Patreon because like I do this Transformers podcast, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it was me sort of evaluating this two-parter where Optimus Prime gets like reverted to his pre-Optimus Prime state. And he's like the younger version of himself where he was a librarian. And it led me down this path though. There's a scene where and this isn't in those particular episodes, but he's dying. He's literally he's on his deathbed and like his chest opens up and there's this thing called the Matrix in there, which gets passed on to the next leader. There's a young Autobot next to him who says like, "Dude, I'm honored that you're offering this to me, but I'm not ready for this responsibility." And Optimus turns to him and says, the choice is neither yours nor mine to make. And like and my brain is kind of funny where like when I hear something like that and I receive something from something like that, it's imprinted and I can conjure it in any given time when I'm feeling like really, really, downtrodden or frustrated or sad or scared, or confused about a project, like when I'm at that point where it's like, this is no good and I'm no good. Well, okay, time to step back. This is part of that experience of engaging with something. So yes, that's how that is a mental model that I rely on heavily in order to get me through these things. And I, again, better or worse. It's not applicable to any person, right? I can't prescribe it.
Oh, I don't know about that. So let's see. So to me, this would be so your prescriptive blog post might be something along the lines of the oh the five heroic truths of getting past any creative encounter or difficulty, something like
Well,
that.
there you go. That's some good editing. Yes, the heroic truths, and I would point to like five different.
That's what I'm hearing. It's
Yeah.
like you have encounters. You have these. It's like your default state is some kind of creative adventure, and then stuff happens. Stuff goes sideways. Something causes the conflict, and you have the your storytelling vocabulary and sense of like meaning making, right? And that delves into the mythology and says, well, this is how this is how Arthur would deal with this. This is how Prime would deal with this, etc.
And not to say like, oh, I'm going to be more like King Arthur today, but more like this is a story that has a lot of resilience. It's been handed down and refined by a lot of people because there's something about it that speaks to something essential about the human experience. Therefore, let's look at it carefully, and maybe I can use this as a barometer or measurement tool or judgment tool to help me evaluate what I'm actually experiencing in the moment. Because when I'm in the moment, when I'm swept up in it, when you're swept up in any kind of emotion of a challenging emotion, you're not thinking clearly. At least I'm not. And so then that's when you talk about like these mental models, like that's what I think of them as being useful for, is when you're lost and you're confused or feeling some kind of big emotion that you're swept up in about the project. Okay, step back. What is the scaffolding that I can rely on to help like realign me to this thing?
I think we have different language to describe a similar circumstance, because I'm not depending on I like your source material. I want to think about how that can affect my process going forward, because it's just a lot more compelling, a lot more energetic, and it's well, and it's imbued with story meaning, right? Which is awesome, because for me, I go to like I look at the woods, and and if I'm really, I'm like, I don't know, do I want to go in or whatever? Where am I at? And I go back into some a mental model style philosophical general map of the world and my, where I feel like I am in it or whatever, right? So I start drawing and thinking, right? So I have a drawing I did on my whiteboard that I think you used for the show art.
I did. I'll pull it up.
And I use this to just kind of talk myself into saying like, yeah, it's okay to be stuck here, but keep going, right? And um, and I started this thinking exercise as the resistance of refinement, and uh, because it's almost like the commitments are deeper, the stakes are higher. I'm further into the story of making this particular project, and it's easier to have everything I've done be a waste, or um to fall off, and to just, maybe it's not worthy of the process and it should be abandoned, and that's the end of the story. Or maybe it's time to dig in, and chances are there's something worth finishing. And so I just started to explore that. I'm like, what's my deal? In a way, like I'm like, I know I like this other stuff earlier in the process, and this later stuff I resist, but it's not like I have no experience with it. So what do I know that's a good idea with this whole thing? And um, okay, now that, and just sort of thinking it through. It's kind of like talking myself off of being worried about what to do next, in a way, and just accepting it and saying, it's okay. I have this resistance. I've encountered it many times. I used to encounter it. One of my favorite things about, like, one of the creative experiences that's become a mental model for me is creating comics. And when I was making a web comic on a regular basis, Art Geek Zoo, because I would go through this emotional arc every single page.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like being burned by the same fire over and over and over. and just saying like, well, at some point I got to blame me. The fire, it's not the fire's fault.
Right. Yeah, but that's the amazing thing about it, right? Is that like that fire will always burn. You're always going to get burnt when you engage with that kind of thing. And I mean, maybe that's a harsh metaphor, but I mean, there's going to be a part of the creative endeavor where where things are ambiguous, and maybe for whatever reason. Maybe it's because of some kind of insecurities you have about yourself as an artist. Maybe it's the pressure of the deadline. Maybe it's an internal pressure of like, I need to get this done by this particular time, you know? Maybe it's because you're thinking about external factors like, is the world even going to want this thing? But there's lots and lots of reasons that can creep in when ambiguity sets in to say like, hey, guess what? You are a failure after all. Every project I engage with that voice in my head, right? We've ding ding ding, we've arrived. We're at the part where you find out you're a fraud. And I talk to so many creative people, and everybody reports, yeah, that doesn't go away. That's part of the deal. And like you'd think, because like we learned from experience that like, well, certainly at some point I'm going to develop the resilience so that it doesn't feel that way, right? Certainly I'm going to grow enough. And I think as far as I've encountered, I've only been doing this like 25 years or so I can't, I'm not super, I wouldn't call myself what they call wise yet, but it feels like I wouldn't call it that, I would call it resilience in the sense that I can endure it. I still experience it and it still sucks, but I know I have the context to know that, yeah, I'm in that part of it. And if I just continue, I will find the shape that this thing needs to be,
That's it. It's like, So what story do you need to tell yourself to just continue?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, I think it'd be a little more spice if I threw in like a giant ape punching castles metaphor, or,
Well, that's just it. You do have those, and you have expressed them on the show and personally to me in the past. Is like the summary that you gave for Dragon Ball Z is like, let's try to become as strong as possible together. Right? There's like an ethos that is imbued in that story that that resonates with you. But are there like specific pieces, right? Or specific aspects so like one thing that I lean on a lot, and this is going to sound silly, but I don't care. I mean, this is who I am, and you're 305 episodes in, is the whole secret identity thing, which in like things like Superman and He-Man, which are profoundly and irrefutably silly. I put glasses on, people don't know who I am. Come on, it's ridiculous. Adam looks just like He-Man, but he's less tan and he wears a salmon vest, right? It's ridiculous, but that's not the point. The point is that they're showing that there's a time to be optimized and there's a time to not be optimized, and they're equally valuable, right? It's not that Adam has to protect his identity because Skeletor will kill his parents. He's already trying to kill his parents. That is nonsense. What it's showing is that there's a time to be a fool, and there's a time to make mistakes, and there's a time to screw up, and there's a time to be at your very best. And if you're always at your very best, you are no longer human. And like, this is a narrative I tell myself, right? It's like when I screw up really bad or when I fail, like the time when I was doing a talk and I thanked the wrong institution and 500 people, including the fire chief and the mayor, booed me. And then 75 people shook my hand afterwards and say like, that was a great talk. Too bad about that thing you said at the top though. It's like, I think like, oh, that was the time for me to be Adam, and I love Adam. I love Prince Adam. And then there's other times.
That's such a painful story. It's a fun story.
It's a great story. It's in the moment. It was humiliating. I mean, like the real sense of the word humiliating. I felt 2 inches tall, and then like I leaned right into it. I'm like, but I'm gonna turn him around. And then at the end of the story, it's like I kind of did, but they didn't forget that I did the wrong thing, and they all wanted to remind me of it. So, but yeah, it's like so. Anyway, like. Yes, that is my. I have a whole vat of those things that I go to help me find that little bit of extra momentum to keep going. And it's not as I found little utility in the whole like muscle through, you'll be stronger at the end. It's like, well, no, I'm looking forward to seeing the guy I meet on the other side. I'm betting he's gonna be a little bit more subtle, more nuanced, and more careful. You know, like another one like I found recently for language is when Obi-Wan Kenobi uses the Jedi mind trick in episode 4, he goes like this. It's just like a little quick flick of the wrist. But when Rey does it, who's younger, less experienced, she uses her arm to use the Jedi mind trick. I'm like, see, I want to go from moving my whole arm to just flicking my wrist to get like that extra level of subtlety and expertise.
It's, yeah, that's what a neat metaphor. So this whole thing. So when you, what do you say? Like, what a weird thing to sell, that it's going to be difficult and painful forever. See ya. But at the same time, I mean, being honest with how that's not what makes the process meaningful. That's some aspect and flavor of that is going to be present, maybe not on every project, maybe I don't know, maybe like how you relate to it or how you even see it, it's like that can totally change over time. But like doing this process of bringing a thing into the world and making it be what it needs to be that you believe in and serve the purpose or your audience or your expression or whatever is your thing. I mean, that work overall, we didn't do science to come to this impression, but like we know lots of artists, we're artists, there's a pretty it's pretty common difficulty for it. And then it's just like, well, how are you going to deal with it? And that kind of thing. And that's where I feel I gain acceptance and strength from the mental model stuff of like, okay, I've got a map and also I'm remembering I've been here before and it's okay that it hurts again, I guess. Because
well, there's reframing.
Learning,
mental models also offer us the opportunity to reframe in the sense that, am I hurting or am I engaging with something that's interesting? Right.
That's a good point too, right? So, gosh, it's so harsh. It's easy to go harsh, and
it is. It is harsh.
Metaphors.
Those are big feelings, but like I also try to remind myself and my students that like, yeah, you know what? It's a guarantee of a life of a lot of ambiguity and frustration as life offers you. May you live in interesting times and all that. And to that end to that point, I say like, well, are you engaged with something that's going to be difficult and ambiguous your whole life? Or are you going to have like a life filled with interesting challenges over and over and over again? That's never going to get dull, So anyway,
excellent point. I think we did plenty of thinking about mental models and some non-prescriptive food for thought. Where
good.
I think our fellow leaners would maybe find something useful there, or it's really how do you explain to yourself your overall process, and when you get stuck, it can help if you don't just disappear inside of yourself, but it has a greater context, right? And I think that's where we get some of the common, muscle up language, whatever. But but there's other things too, like it's just like this interesting hats that Roger Van Oak throws out there. It's anyway, and it's individual, and it's interesting that like I think we describe such a similar circumstance, but way different strategies in just getting through it. And
I think that's good.
I mean, it's anyway.
We're providing evidence that there's no prescription, at least by our reckoning, because we have such different ways of doing it, right?
Yeah.
You can't just apply this medicine to the thing, but here's a couple of options that work for us in ways we think about it. But yeah, yes, like the 4 roles that Van Oak provides gives you a way of like thinking about like different like sort of mindsets to approach. Like when I'm engaging with ambiguity, well, what mode should I be in right now? Let's try it from the explorer mode. Let's try it from the judge mode. Let's try it from the warrior mode. And maybe one of these different like sorts of like frameworks or worldviews or points of view will help me understand what is actually at work here. So
right, because, and that's the thing where it's there's this other book, The Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono, and it's it has some okay framings too, right? The and it really resonates with what you just described in that like functional tools for your creative process are things that can just coexist with however you're feeling. Whether if you're feeling invulnerable and you can solve anything, or if you're feeling highly vulnerable and or or anything in between, there's a tool that can help you with wherever you're at in getting that thing. Are you working on are you working on the right thing, and where is it at, and how far along? Different tools help you at making that come into existence. If you And this is a thing, another lean into our point is that, I mean, especially if you are a independent creator, you're going to be needing to switch between a lot of tools to make your thing come into the world. So if you're on a larger team, then maybe you can have a little extra specialization.
Yeah,
that's great too.
All right. Well, do you think that we're at a point where we should take a break and then come back for the 2-minute practice this week?
Yes, I think we are.
All right. So, okay, everybody, how about in about 2 minutes we come back and we'll conclude with our thinking about what 2-minute practice we're going to try. Well, we're going to reflect on last week's 2-minute practice and look at what we might try this coming week. But before we do that, we got to thank a few more people who make this show possible. And those people happen to be us. We make the show possible. We make lots of interesting things, and then our engagement with those things informs our thinking that generates these topics that we come to every week. And the thing that I make that I hope you will check out is another podcast I do called the 4 Million Years Later podcast. I make it with a friend of mine named Hoover, and it's a podcast where it's a little different than Lean Into Art, although it's informed by the same kind of thinking. We watch an episode of the Generation 1 Transformers cartoon, and then we convene to sort of evaluate, judge, think about, to pick apart, dissect, and celebrate what we saw. And it's been a fascinating journey for me as somebody who's been talking about this on the phone with my buddy Hoover for 25 years. We're recording it now with the express purpose of making it transmissible to an audience. And so we're thinking about it harder than we've ever thought about it before. And I'm discovering feelings about this show and evaluations of the show and points of view in the show that I never considered before. So I'm learning as I go along. And we just dropped episode 12, The Ultimate Doom Part 2. So we're almost done with season 1. But you can go back and listen to like all the way back to episode 0 to get like a sense of what our purposes behind the thing. But the one I would point you at would probably be episode 7, Fire in the Sky, which is our longest episode. And in that one, I go very, very deep into analyzing the tropes and symbology and implied meaning behind the character of Skyfire. I think you listened to that one, Rob, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have listened to pretty much everything. I think I'm caught up. And
oh wow,
it's a great show because it's super funny. I'm listening to this book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, and the 4 Million Years Later podcast. It's almost like you're doing this scene by scene or almost line by line in scene by scene analysis, and so it's a combination of recalling sometimes but in high detail, all these different interactions, all these different like potential things you can observe and talk about choices in the creative process and in the storytelling and the meanings and the characters and the effect on you. And it's like there's you now and you as a kid. I mean, there's all these layers. It's really interesting storytelling analysis.
Oh, thanks, man. So that's at 4millionyearslater.com, or just look in your favorite podcatcher. You will find it. So, Rob, you mentioned at the top of the episode that you do coaching and teaching. What does that mean?
Yeah. So let's see. I do online workshops, and I also do sort of one-on-one sessions to help people think through things you're working on, products you're making, career choices, that kind of thing. So for my coaching, you can go and reach out to me through this easy URL, robcoach.me. Check that out. I yeah, I do have some session availability. Just reach out to me through the contact form on the site, and we will get something planned. We can do a free discovery session. So that'll be just like 30 minutes of some initial unpacking and intention, and understanding like what could coaching do for you. And it's a lot like bringing in like a brain trust, and there's a variety of ways to make use of that. So I do that at robcoach.me. Kate, my business partner and life partner, is at mycoachkate.com. So we both do a similar style of coaching, similar kinds of things. Kate's more about the like leadership, and a little bit of related to like even creative couples, stuff like that.
I know we have some leaners who are in relationships, they have a partner who's also like a creative partner. And so that would be mycoachkate.com. Is that what it was again?
Yeah, mycoachkate.com.
Right.
And just a quick mention, we also do a podcast together. It's called Art and Science Punks. Just search for Art and Science Punks in your favorite podcatcher, or you can go to artsciencepunks.fireside.fm. Fireside.fm.
Fireside.fm. I want to capture that because you guys just dropped an episode that was a pretty intense one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's I don't know if I want to say like no spoilers or anything, but like the episode is called Heart, and it's a fascinating journey talking about how technology, health, family, and managing emotions in some really big challenges.
Yeah. So Kate had a pretty big a health event in the last few months. And it was one of those things where her Apple Watch caught that she was having, let's see, atrial fibrillation. And that's when basically part of your heart is supposed to be running the electronic show, but then other parts try to, add more heartbeats and stuff. So it leads to, a variety of things. And very thankful that we found it out. And she recently had surgery and is recovering really great. So technology is freaking amazing. And we share that story on Art and Science Punks.
And then one last thing, if you enjoy this show and what we do, you can check out the Lean Into Art Discord. There'll be a link in the show notes. We have a forum now where you can interact with us between shows, comment on past episodes, suggest ideas for future episodes, share your challenges, your quests, and your 2-minute practices, which is what we're going to talk about right now. It is time for the 2-minute practice, a weekly session where we challenge ourselves to engage with a inexpensive amount of learning, leveling up, whittling on the microscopic level. 2 minutes of practice to see what accrues. So, hey, Rob.
Hey, Jerzy. So, what did we practice recently?
As I remember, the last challenge was to make some music or noise for 2 minutes during the day, and you did.
I did. I did a fair amount of it. That's one thing about the 2 minutes. It's so cheap. It's like, I can do this. I can just interrupt pretty much anything I'm doing anytime and find the 2 minutes. It's wild how quick it goes. But like when you're in the moment, it can feel like a long time. And so, like for instance, picking up a guitar. And then what I ended up doing was I played guitar for a few of the different days. I played ukulele. I played drums. It was just this playful excuse to just like, all right, go pick up an instrument and make some noise. And one of the things I had the most fun, because I think getting a little bit of signal of, there's something here. I could play with this more if I revisited it, right? Was reminding me of some of the things of and techniques of using my guitar to trigger my MIDI setup. I happen to have it's an older thing, but the Roland G5 MIDI pickup and the G22 effects pedal. So it's like I can play a synth through my guitar. And it's just fun. Like the instruments are really varied, and yet you can trigger them in ways that have a neat feel to them, where and it was nice to just sort of get back and play with that again, because I only typically, you know, dig out these tools when it's like, well, it's part of this project and making a theme song for a podcast or this game background or what a video, some under, sound background thing or whatever. I mean, it's always this project work thing. And so like just playing with it was a blast.
Mm. So your overall reflection on this was like a lot of positivity and reconnecting with the playful aspect of making music?
Sure. Like some of it, it's not, let's see. I wish all of them, like, oh, it'd be neat if I had like 7 2-minute songs now, or 7, minute and a half songs.
Yeah.
Part of me does wish that like even more could come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it was,
this is important. This is important to underline from my perspective, at least, is that it is so easy to get swept up and caught up in this idea of what can be measured. Like this happens in education all the time. Like if you can't measure it, it didn't happen. I don't know. I teach, and there's a lot of things you can't measure that are like profound that like you won't know for sure until years from now how that pays off. And or maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe this is like a quality of life thing that we're just having for a moment here, right? But like, and I am super, super guilty of this. We've talked about this when I do like creative challenge season in October. I always try to find a way to hack the game to make a product out of it or do some kind of product development or research. One thing I'm grateful for.
Awesome. And I'm fully converted and by believing that. So let's not, disparage that approach. It's brilliant. Time's money. And you found a very pragmatic way to engage with creative challenges as a trigger to get your product development process going.
Sure. And
smart.
Yeah. And I am not, I don't mean to disparage that either. It's very valuable. But one of the things that I'm finding value in with the 2-minute practice is that because the constraint of it, because it's so inexpensive, it means I could do it at any given time. I don't have to do any special prep. I'm going to put an asterisk on that for this week's challenge. But it reminds me that, there's a quality of life aspect of this. There's going to be unmeasurable, there's a reason to practice without the promise of measurable success, right? Very recently, I was talking about Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones. She talks about writing practice, and the writing practice is only supposed to be for you. There may be stuff to mine in there, maybe not, but it's there for you. So when I think about what engaging with this particular the practice we agreed to this week, I ran into friction in that if you look behind Rob on the screen, if you're watching on YouTube, in the Lean Into Artcast episode 305, his guitar's back there. They're just there, right for the plucking, pardon the expression. But like, while Ann and I have a bunch of musical instruments, we're in this apartment while we're looking for a home, and like a lot of them are packed away. And so suddenly this friction point came in of like, oh, it's time for the 2-minute practice. Oh, I've got a keyboard. Oh, it's buried in that closet. Oh, I've got an accordion. Oh, it's buried under that desk and it's in a case. And oh, there's a cello over there. But it's not strung right because we haven't like retuned it since we got it back from the movers. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do? I can do some drumming. I can do some humming. I can do things like that. And which was cool because like I instantly went to 2-minute practice. Maybe I'll be able to like find the instrument that I resonate with and I'll know which one, because I'd really like to learn a musical instrument. And I'm like, maybe I'll find the one in this particular week that like speaks to me, and I'll be able to like start to explore that a little bit more deeply afterwards. So again, I'm thinking about like some kind of purpose. But because I limited myself to like, nope, I don't have time to unpack and repack a thing for a 2-minute practice. I don't just have it hanging on a wall. I'm just going to make some noise I'm going to hum, I'm going to drum with my fingers, and just for 2 minutes at a go. So it was one of those things where it was made more explicit to me that I'm not doing this for any purpose other than to just engage with a focused activity for 2 minutes and move on, right? And that kind of, to quote Kate, your partner, purposeful pause, I think that's the value I got out of it this week. And that's the one I continue to get out of it, is it's this purposeful break that is inexpensive, and it disengages me from that whole notion of trying to hunt, right?
It's so interesting that there's a you can be really prepared to engage in certain things, and I use that convenience to just, I'm more prepared to make musical noise than than I appreciate, I think. Um, it's something that I will use making music as a way to take a break. It's not like I only touch, any instrument to just fulfill a need on a project, because I don't have that many of those projects. It comes up every few months. But like what you point out is certain practice, whatever you pick to practice may have an extra cost to it, that it's worth it. It's really worth acknowledging, and that can make it harder. So if you, I mean, if you're picking a practice that has a setup tear down cost, I mean, maybe it's worth, um, thinking about that as far as your week ahead. So could you
Yes.
have an instrument just sitting out for a few extra days?
Yep, and that is definitely a takeaway. Yeah, like if I were to say like, oh, I want to do like a 2-minute watercolor every day. Well, now I'm gonna have to make sure my watercolors are set up on the desk within arm's reach all week long. It's only a week, right? It's not that big of a deal to like change my setup for a week. But yeah,
Yep. And I mean, I think I've done that subtly with most of the practices, is
okay,
I've put stuff out so I could get to it quickly. Like the one where I was doing the large drawings every day, where it's like, I don't have a giant pad of paper, just ease. I have to unpack some things to have the acrylic inks, the brushes, all that stuff, right? And also we're in acknowledging that this will cost a little bit more than 2 minutes, because I can't just leave the brushes all full of the material and whatnot. I need to do a cleanup,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
that kind of thing. But
So
yeah, a lot of interesting ins and outs to this. Where are you? So what do you? Hmm, is there a subtle cost that we're finding to the 2-minute practice that's more than
depending on the
it's?
practice, right?
Yeah.
I think you've very clearly pointed out that some practices will require a little bit of setup. Like for instance, one of our very first practices, we challenged ourselves and the leaners to sort of brainstorm what the 2-minute practice could be. Think for 2 minutes on what you could practice for 2 minutes. And some of the ideas were extraordinarily simple. Doing a 2-minute plank, right?
Mm-hmm.
All you need is a clear space on the floor for that. So there's going to be some that have like zero setup costs. Like in 1 week we did, I did drawing a D&D creature, on a sticky note. And there's always some sticky notes sitting on my desk. So there was zero cost to that. There's always a pen. There's always sticky note nearby. So I can get to that really quickly. But some, like for instance, depending on like, musical instrument one or a watercolor one, something where there's like specialized equipment that you're going to use, there's going to be like some friction with like just making sure that it's available every day that week, which I don't think is like a huge cost.
Good point. Like, yeah, I think it's good to acknowledge. And
Mm-hmm.
I've found that I just sort of, you know, worked around having this extra stuff in my space.
Yeah.
Leaving my guitars set up and whatnot. Dealing with, oh, well, oops, I can't play guitar. I have active pickups. I need to replace the 9-volt battery before I can actually do my 2-minute practice. I mean, oh, okay, that's fine. That's just another quick minute or two. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Still affordable time wise.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a couple weeks. I did actually do a second practice too.
Because yes, we're recording this one a little later than we usually do. So what'd you do for your second practice?
I did the mini workouts. I rotated through plank and push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. So I have one of those pull-up bars that clamps on a doorway, right? And so I just left that up, and that was a case of something being in the way, but it's not too big of a deal. And then for 2 minutes, and that one worked out okay overall. And it's just like, but strenuous workout activity, it's better to do warm up and stretching and all that stuff. And I'd had a little bit of a tight back one evening because of that darn 2-minute plank.
So what are we thinking about doing for next week?
You mentioned meditation.
Yeah.
So
thinking about that? 2 minutes of meditation?
Mm-hmm.
That is inexpensive, right? And I think when you talk about purposeful pauses, oh man, being able to just stop yourself for 2 minutes and just focus on breathing. I don't think there's enough time to really lose your train of thought on that. Well, maybe there is, actually, depending on how fast your brain works, but
it's always, sitting still is always, we'll see how it feels in the beginning and as it happens throughout the week.
I think that's great. Okay, so let's commit to that. So for this week's 2-minute practice, we're going to sit still and focus on our breathing for 2 minutes every day. And optional to share your results on the Lean Into Art Discord. If you'd like to share, we'd love to hear about your experiences. And you can also share with us on our social feeds. And, you don't have to pick this particular practice. There's lots of different options to choose from. Any other thoughts you have on that, Rob?
We're working on expanding the leanintoart.com/2-minute practice. So this segment of the show is becoming its own show. And that's handy for reference and handy just sort of to play along and emphasize that that we're trying to make it easy to play along, and this is a resource. So you can always mine this for ideas, and also we'll be actually posting lists of things, almost like how some podcasts that do picks will post their list of picks or what have you. So hopefully we'll get an accruing, interesting list of practices, and reach out to us. Use the comment form on Lean Into Art, or just reach out to us on Twitter or whatnot with ideas for what do you want to try and learn, experience in 2 minutes.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Jerzy.
Okay, I think, did we do a podcast?
I'm pretty sure we did. We did a couple podcasts.
All right. Well, thank you for this discussion, Rob. We record this show weekly, usually on Thursdays at noon Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Central. And we stream it live at twitch.tv/leanintoart and then collect it as a podcast at leanintoart.com and patreon.com/leanintoart. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy Drozd on Instagram.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com, and I'm Rob Stenzinger, places like Instagram.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.